Today, we are reviewing a passionate commentary piece that refutes Candace Owens' claims regarding the death of Charlie Kirk by utilizing direct rebuttals from Turning Point colleagues and a Trinity Church pastor.
Yeah, and right off the bat, I really love the exceptionally strong use of primary sources here.
Oh, absolutely. It gives us an incredibly solid foundation, so let's just dive right into the feedback.
Elevating the rhetorical approach from reactive personal attacks to sharp fact-based dismantling can significantly broaden the material's impact and credibility.
Exactly. Because when we look closely at the section discussing the author's reaction to the claims, that is really where we see the primary weakness in this current draft.
Right.
Right now, the material relies heavily on highly charged colloquial ad hominem. Throughout the text, the subject is referred to with terms like narcissist, a bitch, and a fucking liar.
Yeah, which, it perfectly matches a highly informal conversational venting style.
Sure.
And it definitely conveys the writer's genuine outrage, but it creates a huge vulnerability for the piece as a whole.
It really does. It's clearly laid out, but I wonder, though, if we've considered how much more devastating the argument becomes when the writer removes themselves from the emotional fray entirely.
Right, shifting the focus completely away from the name-calling.
Exactly. And instead letting the concrete evidence do all the heavy lifting. You have these stark, undeniable contradictions in the subject's own claim, and when the tone becomes overtly hostile.
And reliant on profanity.
Yeah, reliant on profanity, you are basically handing detractors an incredibly easy excuse to dismiss the entire argument.
They can just wave it away.
They just wave it away as purely emotional or react rather than engaging with the factual inconsistencies being presented.
I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this with some concrete examples for the writer to implement.
Okay.
Instead of saying, as the draft currently does, this bitch, she is off the charts, you can lean heavily into the sheer audacity of her claims by creating a direct contrast.
Right, because we have this profound, perceived self-importance from the subject.
She's claiming she could have saved his life.
Yes.
So the writer should directly juxtapose that grandiose claim with the devastatingly casual quote from Lucas Miles.
Oh, the quote where he stated that in 15 months her name came up exactly once?
Exactly once, and it elicited nothing more than an eye roll. The contrast between her claimed importance and the reality of his reaction is infinitely more powerful than the insult.
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion, like letting the primary sources deliver the rhetorical kill shots rather than the narrator?
Oh, absolutely.
For instance, when summarizing the pastor's post, the current draft concludes by just calling her a fucking liar.
Right.
But look at what the pastor actually said in the material provided.
He drops an absolute mic drop moment.
He states he will be preaching on the 9th commandment, false witness,
and noting that your demons already know it.
Which is just an incredible line.
It really is. It's the ultimate, incredibly sharp intellectual and spiritual insult.
And the evidence and the quotes the writer has gathered are so inherently strong that pasting explicit cursing over them actually dilutes their immense power.
Yeah, by letting the pastor's words stand completely on their own, unembellished, the subject ends up looking far worse than any base name-calling could ever achieve.
It's the classic rule of showing versus telling.
Right.
When you call someone a liar, you're just giving an opinion. When you step back and simply present a respected pastor quoting the 9th commandment at them, you are presenting an undeniable reality.
It traps the subject. It removes the off-ramp that an insult usually provides.
Precisely. You want to adopt a tone of righteous indignation through objective dismantling. You essentially step back and allow the subject's own action, contrasted against these fantastic primary sources, to hang them out to dry. Let the quotes do the screaming for you.
Restructuring the argument into a clear, escalating chronological or thematic progression will create a much more compelling and impenetrable case against the subject's narrative.
Because looking at the bones of this piece, the sequence of information right now feels a bit haphazard.
Yeah. As I understand it from the text, the argument opens by critiquing the subject's mispronunciation of the word naivety.
And referencing comments about Mar-a-Lago gangster.
Right. But then, almost instantly, it careens into incredibly heavy life-and-death claims about assassination.
And then bounces over to colleague reactions regarding phone calls.
And then suddenly pivots again to debunking a pastor's timeline.
It gives the reader whiplash.
Completely. The transition between personal annoyance over a mispronounced word and the factual debunking of claims surrounding a tragic death feels intensely jarring.
It prevents the reader from settling into a rhythm.
And it diminishes the cumulative weight of the evidence. When you start with a petty grievance, you frame the entire piece as a petty feud, rather than the serious, factual takedown it actually is.
The material makes a strong case for the truth by highlighting these different facets, but the delivery mechanism really needs refinement. The suggestion to resolve this is to proactively organize the piece into distinct, deliberately escalating phases.
Right.
Now, we are suggesting a 3-act structure here, conceptually titled the premise, the character witnesses, and the factual dismantle. But keep in mind, this is just one of many possible ways you could organize this to build tension. You could also try grouping it by specific claims or building a purely chronological timeline of events. The key is intentionality.
Is the connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
Right, because right now the connections are loose.
Let's provide some concrete examples of how to build this specific 3-phase structure to show what we mean.
Okay.
In phase 1, the premise, the writer should start by firmly establishing the subject's core narrative and capitalizing on the emotional hook.
So leave the mispronunciation stuff on the cutting room floor.
Exactly. Clearly lay out her central, audacious claim right at the top. The claim that Charlie's naivety got him killed, and that he would still be alive today if he had only listened to her warnings.
Right.
Keep the focus entirely on defining the boundaries of her narrative here, setting up the exact thesis that the rest of the piece is going to systematically destroy.
And once that premise is locked in, we move seamlessly into phase 2, the character witnesses.
This is where you bring in the turning point staff to establish the objective reality of the relationship.
This directly counters her narrative of being this trusted, essential advisor.
Right. This is where you deploy that quote from Alex Clark about screening her calls because she gave him anxiety.
When I read that quote about the screened calls, my jaw literally dropped.
I know.
The writer buried this. This should be front and center. It's an incredible piece of evidence. Use this section to prove that he deliberately avoided her.
Yeah.
This completely shatters the savior narrative she is attempting to construct, proving that rather than seeking her counsel, her presence was actively a source of stress. It shifts the argument from she's wrong about what happened to she wasn't even in the room to know what happened.
That's fascinating. What are the potential limitations or counterarguments to that idea?
Well, a detractor might say, okay, maybe they didn't talk every day, but she still had inside info.
And that naturally sets up the final, most devastating section to close that loophole. Phase 3, the factual dismantling.
The smoking gun.
The smoking gun.
This is where you bring in the Trinity Church pastor to serve as the climax of the argument. In this phase, the writer needs to clearly and clinically map out the timeline discrepancy.
That this conversation about fearing for his life happened mere days before the tragedy.
Supposedly validating her narrative about his present naivete.
Exactly. Then drop the hammer with the pastor's clarification. The conversation happened months prior, and it was explicitly regarding fears of the left, which is entirely unrelated to her constructed narrative.
By structuring it this way, premise, character witnesses, factual dismantling, the piece becomes an inescapable trap for the subject's argument. It mimics a courtroom trial.
Yeah. You have the opening statement outlining the lie, the character witnesses establishing the reality of the relationship, and then the definitive proof destroying the timeline.
It transforms a collection of angry observations into an airtight case.
Expanding the focus to examine the broader phenomenon of capitalizing on tragedy can transform this piece from a specific interpersonal dispute into a highly resonant piece of cultural commentary.
Because the fundamental weakness we need to address here is that the material, in its current form, is trapped entirely in a hyper-specific reactionary loop.
Right. It is deeply entrenched in the granular details of who said what.
Analyzing the minutiae of the feud and focusing intensely on the subject's reliance on what the author calls mommy sleuth.
Which is a great phrase, by the way.
It is a great phrase, but while this granular focus is engaging for a niche audience already following the daily drama, the piece misses a massive opportunity to tell the broader audience why this behavior actually matters on a macro scale.
It lacks the critical so what factor that separates a fleeting internet rant from lasting, impactful commentary.
So, a key theme running through this material seems to be the weaponization of a real-life tragedy for personal clout and narrative building.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of media literacy and audience manipulation? Because that's really what's happening underneath the surface here.
The suggestion for the writer is to actively use this highly specific incident as a clear microcosm for the much larger, incredibly toxic trend of narcissistic opportunism we are seeing across modern media.
The goal is to elevate the state. This shouldn't just be about proving Candace Owens wrong in this one specific instant. It needs to be about exposing a systemic rot in how public figures consume, package, and repurpose grief for engagement metrics.
Exact. Let's give some concrete examples of how the writer can achieve this expansion, keeping in mind that there are many ways to zoom out.
In the concluding thoughts, after validating the pastor as a strong man of God who rightfully called out a lie,
Which, again, is a really great grounding moment in the text.
the author should add a dedicated paragraph exploring the inherent danger of treating real-life tragedies as mere content fodder. The writer can pivot from the specific pastor to the general audience, asking them to recognize this broader pattern of behavior.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on the interpersonal feud might overlook the profound moral failing at play here?
Absolutely. And we can use the writer's own fantastic observations to bridge that gap. Take the mention of the mommy sleuth sending in tips. The writer should expand on that ecosystem.
Right. How dangerous is it when unverified tips from internet echo chambers are suddenly leveraged by public figures who possess massive, multi-million follower platforms?
It's incredibly dangerous. The writer can illustrate how this dynamic allows bad actors to literally rewrite the history of a tragedy in real time.
They're overriding the voices of the actual victims, the grieving family members, and the close colleagues who are actually there.
The writer needs to make the stakes higher. The closing argument shouldn't just be, she lied about the timeline.
The closing argument should be about the integrity of truth in the wake of an assassination. It's about the grotesque nature of rushing to a fresh grave to plant a flag for your own personal brand.
By shifting the lens outward at the very end, the writer leaves the reader not just nodding along to a satisfying takedown, but genuinely reflecting on the state of our discourse.
They walk away thinking about the ethical responsibilities of those with large platforms and how audiences participate in that cycle.
That is what will make this piece memorable and, frankly, highly shareable long after the immediate controversy fades from the news cycle. It turns it from an update into an essay.
To quickly recap our primary takeaways for this critique. First, we strongly recommend trusting the inherent power of the curated primary evidence over emotional attacks. Shifting the tone away from profanity to an objective, clinical dismantling leaves the subject with nowhere to hide.
Right.
Second, we advise restructuring the rebuttals into a clearly escalating progression, like the premise, character witnesses, and factual dismantling structure we discussed, to maximize the tension and impact of the argument.
Exactly.
And finally, we suggest widening the lens in the conclusion to address the much broader cultural issue of exploiting real-world tragedy for digital clout.
I want to leave the author with a final, highly encouraging thought. The sheer potential of this piece is immense. The writer has demonstrated a truly deep, nuanced understanding of the source material and has executed an absolutely excellent curation of counter-evidence.
Truly.
Finding, vetting, and aligning those specific quotes from Lucas Miles, Alex Clark, and the pastor requires a very sharp editorial eye. The raw materials for a devastating, top-tier commentary piece are all right here. It simply requires the structural and tonal recalibrations we've discussed to let those materials shine to their absolute fullest potential.
We want to sincerely thank the listener for sharing their work with us today. It takes guts to put your writing out there for feedback. We warmly invite you to implement these structural and thematic changes and submit your revised draft or any future materials you are working on back in for another critique. Keep refining, keep challenging the material, and keep writing.